Well done.
Good.
Uh, so, so yeah, I guess I have so much I want to ask. I'm really excited to be talking to you about this movie, which I love so much. I guess let's just start at the very basic thing, which is kind of the inception of this movie, where it started. So yeah, why Barbie? Why now? What was the uh, well, I know, but so American Prometheus was the origin of it. You reading that book? Was this a topic that you were into before? And the what was the seed of the whole thing for you?
I mean, it's a lot of things coming together over time. I think growing up in the United Kingdom in the 1980s under the threat, the very apparent threat of nuclear war, in the culture at that time in the 80s, it was a very acknowledged problem. There was the Americans were putting cruise missiles at Greenham Common when I was a kid, and there were protests about that, and so it was something that was just very much in the culture. I mean, as it was here. So I think the first time I ever heard about Oppenheimer, Oppenheimer's name was Sting's song "Russians" from the 80s.
Oh, Dream of the
Oppenheimer's
Blue
Deadly Toy.
Turtles. That's right.
Yeah, and I think that as with a lot of people, I knew the name Oppenheimer. I knew something about. I knew the association with the atomic bomb, but I knew there was more to the story, but I didn't know exactly what. But a kind of darkness around it and around the figure of him. And then at some point, I learned this piece of information that in the run up to Trinity, they had not been able to completely eliminate the theoretical, the possibility of atmospheric ignition that would destroy all life on Earth. But they went ahead and they pushed that button, and I just thought, I mean, there's never been a moment like that in history, and so to go there and see that would be amazing. I referred to it in my previous film, Tenet, as analogy for the science fiction conceit that's the heart of that film. And Rob Pattinson, who's in that film, he gave me a book of Oppenheimer speeches as a wrap gift. And I started reading about Oppenheimer and his colleagues' attempts to sort of not to rationalize, to theorize about how they might contain this threat that they had unleashed on the world. And it started to seem very, very dramatic. And um, Emma and I went to stay with our friend Chuck Roven, who we produced the Dark Knight trilogy with. And he suggested I read American Prometheus, which he was involved with, trying to set up as a movie. It's a book that came out some years ago, but hadn't found a home, hadn't found a way for it to be adapted. And as I started reading it, I immediately started to feel uh, the extraordinary connections between this individual's personal life and the global situation, the global history that he's so much a part of. And those connections are hard to find, actually, when you look at, it's the sort of great man of history theory. So, well, would these things have happened anyway? Are we really looking to an individual to say he's responsible for the atomic bomb? And the answer is no, but Los Alamos was where he liked to go horse riding with his brother. And that's become this incredibly important place in history because of his will and his desire to turn things to his will. And that's an exciting thing to find a personal way into a larger story. So I was really hooked from that point.
Which and what you just said makes me think that there's something fascinating about the way that you just formatted the specific script. Is this true that the script is written in first person, the descriptions?
Yeah, the color sequences, which are the subjective thread. There are two threads to the story: the subjective and the objective, the color and the black and white. And as I started to write, I kept feeling. I knew I didn't want to use voiceover, but I kept feeling in the form of the screenplay, I wasn't able. Something was missing. I wasn't able to sort of penetrate the point of view the way I wanted to. And so at some point, and I don't know if this is something other people have done, whatever, but I had never done it. I started just writing the stage directions in the first person. I walk across the room, sit down at the desk, that kind of thing, and it immediately hooked me into his point of view as a reader and as a writer, the way that a voiceover would have. And I showed it to my brother Jonah, who I work with a lot. So I always pick his brain on things, and I'd finished about a third of the screenplay, and I just gave it to him to read without telling him why I was giving it to to read. And he immediately said to me, well, you spent years trying to format a screenplay so that people pay attention to the stage directions. Because in my films, that's very important because it gives you chronological clues, structural clues. And the truth is, most of us read the dialogue. We just go through the dialogue. And I've been looking for a way to get people to read the stage directions. And his point is, well, you finally found it. Because as soon as you put it in the first person, you feel that this is information you've got to pay attention to.
And also, I'd assume just for you as a writer, it just kind of lashes you to the mast of it being from his perspective, and that being so
Yeah.
important to this film, not only in terms of that being the thing that hooks you and draws you through, but also from the historic perspective, from a lot of the things in the film, just constantly reminding you this is through his eyes.
Definitely in the writing process, and then also in the reading process and the shooting process, everybody, when they're looking at their sides on set every day, there's this constant reminder that it's all from his point of view. We've got to get in his head. We've got to figure out a way with, Hoyte van Hoytema, who's the director of photography. It's like, we've got to get the cameras close to him and a little further from Strauss and that kind of thing. And vice versa for the black and white scenes. And so it just oriented us. It kept us honest in terms of what's the strict point of view. And we really adhered to it quite religiously, actually. But it as we watched dailies, it started to pay dividends. It started to feel like it was going to do what we wanted it to do.
I think you can so feel it in the finished film. So you decide you want to attack this, and all those connections you said. It's I find it, as someone who also was like a kid in the 80s, it's almost hard to communicate now, remembering like the constant waking up every morning fear of missiles could fall from the sky onto your head. So the emotional way is in there for you. You have American Prometheus, which is a doorstop that is a 700 something page book that was researched and exhaustively written over decades. How do your emotional way in? How do you start breaking it down? What is that process?
I mean, in practical terms, for me, the process was, even a legal point of view, a copyright point of view, all the rest, to be able to have one book that gives you so much. And Martin Sherwin in particular, Kai Bird had collaborated on this book. Martin, he researched this book for 25 years. It took an enormous amount of time to write. So there's incredible information and analysis in there. And so I only read beyond it. Once I'd read it once, I only read beyond it with primary sources. So Senate hearing records, the transcript of the Oppenheimer security hearings, those kind of things. And then what I did is I read the book again, and then I started making notes without the book on really just what I remembered, for what had made an impression, what felt essential to, it's literally if you're sitting at the dinner table trying to explain to somebody this book you've read, what do you tell them about it? What are the hooks? What are the things? And making a lot of those kind of notes. Then as I felt ready to write, once I had a structure, and to me, I always have to have the structure before I start, very specifically worked out. I hit upon the structure of the two braided timelines because the book had a reference to Strauss's Senate hearing, the fact that he wasn't confirmed. And that I sort of grabbed a hold of that, of like, okay, that's some kind of, I don't know, call it poetic justice, whatever, that he got put through what he put Oppenheimer through several years later. And so I started researching that, built up a knowledge of that, and then braided the two things together. And as I wrote, I would work from the book, putting it into screenplay form, sort of chapter by chapter in a way, but within the structure that I'd constructed. The great thing is the book has a fantastic index. So you're able to, when you're like, okay, I know Teller said something about something, you could go and you could find it. Similarly with the published versions of the security hearing transcripts, they're extensively, annotated and analyzed, so you can cross-reference things and find things that your brain is kind of telling you. I know 3 months ago something stuck in my head that was important that this person said or that person said.
Well, let's talk about structure. Because as someone who loves all of your movies, I feel like all of them to various degrees have two things for me. They first of all have some kind of intricate structural kind of gambit that they're playing, but that always creates a linear emotional experience for me when I'm watching the film that feels kind of flawlessly. It doesn't feel like it works basically on the screen. Uh, How do you do it, man? But
Well,
like,
no,
yeah,
there's a good answer to that because when I did my first film, small film called Following, black and white, 16 mil, I had a structure that I knew I wanted to use with three timelines rotating. But I thought, okay, the way to do that is I'll write the chronological story and then I'll cut it up and assemble it according to my structure. And what I found is that took so much rewriting to make it comprehensible for the audience, to make it emotionally comprehensible, that I realized never to do that again. And so ever since, I've always written my screenplays, whatever the structure is, you write from page one through to page, well, in this case, 180, but,
I was going to ask.
I know. But so that way you get the flow of it. So with Memento, for example, which is structured in reverse chronology, alternating with forward chronology, I wrote the script from beginning to end. I always read it from beginning to end. I never reassembled it. I would check the continuity, if you like, mentally rather than on the page. And then, of course, as you come to make the film, the department heads, everybody's breaking it down in their own way. They're looking at the timelines. They're figuring out the continuity. So you have a lot of brains on that to see where you've made mistakes and all the rest. But I find that way you get the flow as you're going to experience it as an audience member.
My God, I just realized your script supervisor on set. Who is that
Yes.
person? And
That person was Steve Gerke, who
yeah,
has been with me since Memento.
I guess
He's
he
one of
must.
the
Yeah.
longest serving crew members, and he's very, very good at his
Double
job.
that man's salary. So I still want to dig more into this though. Do you outline, and do you actually write out an outline, or is it something where you
Yeah.
conceptually have it in your head?
I don't write an outline. I take a lot of notes and I do a lot of diagrams. I do a lot of sort of, I don't know, almost abstract structural diagrams, of what the shape of the story is, what the geography is.
Literally, what kind of form do they take? Like, what shapes do you draw? Or does it depend on what
Depends.
yeah,
All sorts. A lot of graphs though. Tenet was a lot of graphs. A lot of graphs, a lot of different axes, that kind of thing. This one was more notes actually. It was more I had a handle on this structure in my head. And so it was but sometimes it's like Venn diagrams as well of points of view and where they intersect and what are the intersecting scenes. Things like that aren't screenplay form. I've never found to me, outlining tends to be a sort of a script without the dialogue, if you know what I mean. Like I'm not. I think if I'm ready to write the outline, I'm probably ready to write the script. So I try and approach it in different geometric ways, I guess I would say.
Do you find that we either with this or any of your other movies has once you've gotten into your hands in the dirt and started writing it in script form, has it changed dramatically from what you had conceived of in terms of the structure, or have you hit a thing where you're like, oh, this doesn't, you've had to do a major readjustment while you're in the thick of it?
Not about the fundamentals of the structure. I explore it enough in notes and conceptual terms to hit those blind alleys before I start to write. I really don't write the screenplay until I'm ready and I'm confident that at least I'll have to get all the way through the script to know whether it's worked. And I think in all of them it's worked the way that I needed it to or wanted it to.
And what is, I mean, because the old saw that every filmmaker like has one Lego set that they build and then break down and build again and break down. There is this thing of time and of playing with structure and of that obviously is a groove in your brain that feels good to you. What do you like? And I don't know if you even want to like try and examine like what is it about that? What is it that is an emotional way into a story for you? Examining it in this kind of temporally fractured or reversed way.
About time.
Yeah.
My glib answer is I'm interested in time because I've always lived in it. And I think the relationship between movies and time is fascinating. It's always fascinated me. And I think that the architecture, the way in which conventional movies deal with time is incredibly sophisticated and very elusive. So one of the really fascinating things to do is to watch a romantic comedy with people or whatever, and then ask them, did that take, what was the time scale of that? Was it 2 years? Was it 2 weeks? Was it a month? And people really don't know. There's a dreamlike sense of time in conventional filmmaking, and it's a very sophisticated mechanism. And so what I enjoy doing is exposing that mechanism and almost sort of pulling it apart and drawing attention to it, because I think it gives you access to other aspects of how you link information, narrative information, that novelists have used forever. I mean, playwrights, novelists, whatever, always use nonlinear structures whenever it felt like the appropriate way to lay out the information. I think film started off that way. So if you look at a lot of the early silence, they're incredibly adventurous structures, or maybe Citizen Kane, and then I think when television comes along, film trends towards something that plays well on television, and that tends to be more linear, pre-DVD, pre-random access. So between, call it, 1950 and 1981, or whenever the first VHS machine comes along, things have to play in an intensely linear way, so that if you're watching a movie on TV and the pizza gets delivered and you take 5 minutes to pay for it or whatever, you can kind of pick it up, pick up the thread of it. And I think it's really, it's when you get home video, get the video generation, you get, Quentin working in a video store, starting to make non-linear films of great density, those kind of things. Narratives start to once again be able to be more and more complicated. And now I think television in recent years has just, gone crazy with that. I mean, the order of episodes isn't even a thing. You know what I mean? There's so many different ways to engage the audience in all these different media.
Yeah, it's kind of caught up, and I mean that's one of the things I find so, I mean, so exciting about what you do is, and it's thrilling to me, just it pushing the envelope of how intricate and how complex and how weird the mechanism can be in terms of how you jump around with time, and that these are also big commercial movies that play to audiences around the world in a big way. I mean, and that people are with them, and that, so that, but I want to talk about rewriting. So you get your draft done, and I'm assuming with the complexity, especially something like this, but with a lot of your movies, what is that process? I know that obviously Emma Thomas, who's here, I think, is she here? Have a hand for Emma Thomas. Yeah, yeah, there she is. And also Jonah, your brother, obviously, who you write with. Who do you have kind of like a trusted circle that you bounce stuff off of? And what is generally, having put this much engineering into them, what does the rewrite process look like for you?
I mean, the old saw is, writing is rewriting, and I think for screenplays, for feature screenplays, it's very true. I have the unfortunate habit of, I mean, I suppose ironically for somebody who structures things the way I do, I can only rewrite from page one onwards. So I every time I want to change something in the third act, I start again at the beginning. I go all the way through. But so you're sort of building it in layers in a way. And a lot of it for me, over the years, my process has been to overwrite tremendously, deliberately, and just overwrite, particularly with dialogue, just spew it out, say everything you possibly say, and then use the editing process to write with.
The editing, not meaning in the script form, but the meaning at the end of
no,
the,
meaning
like,
in the script
in the
form.
script form. Okay, all right.
You then get to do that again in the edit suite. But I think for me to find the voice of a character, or to find the balance between a discursive, philosophical, abstract idea and what somebody would really say convincingly in a dramatic situation, I need to overwrite to explore everything on there, and then winnow it down to just what the bare essentials are, which is more how people speak. I mean, I'm rambling a bit right now, but mostly people speak, pretty precisely, pretty simply. And trying to get, I mean, this film is full of complicated ideas that you're trying to simplify. So I take great comfort really in overwriting, and then knowing that I can pick things out of that, get rid of the stuff that doesn't work, and hopefully be left with something usable.
How much for a reader reading your scripts, how much are you directing on the page? That's the other thing about this film and a lot of your work. It's very, especially in some of the sequences that are covering
Mm.
massive swaths of time in a pretty compact thing. It's incredibly efficient in terms of each shot telling a story and sometimes hopping ahead. How much is that on the page? How much is how was actually
I
look
think
like?
the structure's on the page and the editing rhythms are on the page, but I don't describe shots. So it's not that type of direction. As a writer director, I could sort of take the director hat off and just visualize it in a more free way. And so I tend to just describe the events of what's happening, of what's been said, and how I'm going to structure that, and not really give too many indications necessarily of how it would be filmed, for example, because that also allows people to use their own imagination. And when you put together that group of people to make the film with, you're looking for them to bring something more. I believe as writers, we could put an enormous amount of imagination into something. But when you add hundreds of other people's imaginations in every department, every aspect, and the actors coming on and taking on, the director of photography, everybody, that's when you start to get a convincing density and heft to the layers of what you're trying to get across in terms of a convincing version of a world, a philosophical approach, narrative density, those things. So you're really trying to leave space for people to bring something. You're giving them the skeleton and putting the flesh on the bones.
Do you, speaking of casting, do you write with actors in your head? Do you have, even if they aren't who you end up getting in the movie, do you write seeing actors or?
I try not to. Sometimes actors get stuck in your head. Every now and again, they get stuck in your head. I remember when I was writing Batman Begins, I got Morgan Freeman stuck in my head for Lucius Fox. I never got him out, and then he didn't want to do the film, so I had to convince him. But generally, no. I try, and particularly with this, I didn't have to. That always feels like a cheat to me. It always feels like rather than constructing a character, I'm kind of grabbing at something I've already seen. With this, I didn't have to because I had the real people. So this, I know who I'm trying to get across. But I also, even when it's pure fiction, I don't want to write to an actor because then you're writing something they've already done and you're limiting them. Even if that is the actor that you then want to work with, they're going to be reading something on the page that's already in their voice. And you want to challenge people like Cillian Murphy or Robert Downey Jr. Or, you want to be giving them something they've never done before. So I really try not to visualize actors. As I say, sometimes it gets stuck in your head. But.
Yeah, and I mean, just a side note. I know we're mostly talking about writing, but the casting in this film and Killian, obviously. Oh my God, I'm very, very happy he can start talking about this movie again because I want to go to a Q and A and hear him. I'm sure not as happy as you are.
I'd be very happy for the actors to be able to say some things about the film. I've done the rounds, as they say. But
you're great.
You know what? I love being here at the Writers Guild talking about writing the script. I was a little more uncomfortable sitting on The View talking about it. But you do what it takes, right? But no, I'm thrilled, and but I don't know how much Killian's really going to want to talk about it. To be honest, I mean, his process is so internal. He's such a pure artist who just lost himself in the character in such a wonderful way, and I didn't really know what he was doing until I edited it. Jen Lame and myself, my editor, in the edit suite, starting to put it into sequence and really see what it is. I knew he was doing a great job. We were working closely together, but I've known him for 20 years. I've worked with him on so many films. I took him for granted completely. It was just like, yeah, Oppenheimer's over here doing that, and then be talking to everybody else. And I think it was right before the end of the shoot. Actually, it was right as Robert Downey Jr. finished. He came up to me and he just quietly said, he said, I think Killian's a bit tired and you've really been pushing him quite hard. He's doing a lot for you. You know that, right? To which I thought about it and I was like, he's fine.
Also, the Robert Downey Jr. performance that I feel like I've been just pining for a long time. Real, just absolutely tremendous. I mean, so you've, obviously with Dunkirk, you've covered historic topics before. I feel like with this though, because and this ties into the first person perspective in the screenplay, but also uh, all the things going into deep into the connections that you saw between his what's happening in his head and in his heart and what's happening on this global level and all the sexuality in it and just really diving in. What for you in terms of writing this kind of getting this intimately into somebody's head and having it be having these be real historic figures, people who actually lived? Is there any difference for you? Is there a sense of responsibility to it? Is there a sense of
I
any
think,
of
I
that?
mean, hopefully a lot of people who can relate to this, but the ego of the writer is such that once you get going, it's all yours. The bomb is mine, everything's mine. It's just, it's like I'm making it all up. So all of that responsibility comes before you start writing. When you're writing, you have, it has to be yours.
American Prometheus. Yeah.
Thank you.
I do actually want to talk about editing a little bit, which is so intimately connected to writing. I think with this, but also with all your with your other films. To what extent, after all that engineering in the writing, do you get in the edit, and how malleable is it? Have you, with this or otherwise, you end up shifting stuff around? Does it, or are you pretty?
Definitely. I mean, Jen Lame, who cut the movie, it's the second film I've done with her. You're trying to find the characterizations. You're trying to find the truth within each scene. The structure doesn't allow for a lot of the tools you would normally have in the edit are taken off the table because of the connections between scenes that you've established in the structure. But with every film, I think with every film I've done, actually, I've found that the structure you put on the page, the frequency with which you cut between timelines, for example, at the beginning of the film. On the page, it works better if you cut frequently and you sort of teach the reader the structure quickly. And then you get in the edit suite and you start to feel it as an audience when you sit and the lights go down and the film starts. You have to spend a little more time finding your rhythm, letting the audience connect with what's going on. And so with almost every film, I think I've taken the first two blocks of each timeline and put them into one and simplified the structure of the first, call it 10 minutes or so of the film, to just have a more conventional rhythm to it. Because I think when we start to watch films, they tend to start with sometimes disconnected abstract imagery. And I found that if we don't calm down, let people talk and just sort of see what's going on in the story, it's a little bit difficult to hook in. But it reads differently on the page. On the page, you have to teach the structure. You have to immediately kind of get people into the rhythm. But that's the thing about a screenplay, is it's not a finished piece of writing. It's there as a guide. It's there, as the jumping off point for everything that happens after.
Yeah, really a blueprint. I love the ending of the film, and it also though it just kind of drives a spike into what's been laid throughout the whole thing in terms of talking about growing up as a kid in the 80s and talking about to even our experience now with the very real day-to-day terror of what this has wrought. First of all, talk about kind of the ending and coming to especially the story this big, coming to the moment of what to land on and kind of what that meant to you. And also, I mean, dealing with not just that, but dealing with the issue of dropping the bomb, dealing with his perspective on it, dealing with some stuff that is really, incredibly volatile material. Wrapping your head around that and wrapping your head around how to approach that.
Yeah, well, that's a lot in one question.
I was going to say that's 18 questions. It's okay. She
gonna-
gave me the 5 minutes. I was like, shit. And this and this and this, what about, and the bomb and Hiroshima. You can do it. You did The
I can do
View.
it.
You can handle this. Come
Okay.
on.
All right. Well, yes, I had the ending to the story fairly early on, before I started to write. Not the complete ending, but the notion of the chain reaction, the relationship between when they thought they might destroy the world with this chain reaction, and the idea that actually that is the beginning potentially of the chain reaction, that he might see it that way. And that, so I knew where I was going with that. And at some point when I was about halfway through the script, I literally kind of woke up in the middle of the night with the whole, like, last 3 or 4 minutes of the film just ready. And I went downstairs and went to my office and just scribble it. Luckily, the next day, it made sense still, and which it doesn't always, but I could read my handwriting. It made sense, and then I knew where I was going with it, and everything in the structure of the film. There were two main structural conceits or approaches around what you're talking about with the stakes and the weight of it, and the one was to try and finish Trinity with the absolute highest high of energy, positivity, and then in the shortest amount of time possible, go to the absolute lowest low, and shift the film as quickly and suddenly as possible. That felt like the way to try and get across the momentous nature of what's happening through his point of view. And so the middle of the film, 2/3 of the way through, very much based on that, and then leading into the end section, which becomes, for me, it becomes a courtroom drama, and it becomes a trial about a trial, as Strauss says. And my feeling was, well, when I did Dunkirk, as a British person, knowing that story, it's a story, it's so freighted with emotion that I felt that what you could do is tell a very mechanical story of action, of the thriller element, of just suspense, because the emotion was going to be there inherently in the story. And I felt that with Oppenheimer's story, it was an interesting comparison. I felt that I wanted to make as positive a conclusion as possible in terms of the narrative turns, the narrative relationship between Strauss gets his comeuppance. So it, in a way, it's a very positive approach to finishing his story, because ultimately, as the ending sort of sings out and draws attention to, the nihilism of what's going on underneath cannot be denied, and nothing you can do. There is no happy ending to the story. So you can structurally push as far as you can in that direction without ever losing the darkness, without ever losing the underlying tone of, despair. And so that what I wanted to drive towards was this sort of positive conclusion where, in a way, he's seen to almost win or to control his world. But then at the end, you see that, yeah, it's.
Well, we can't end with that. That's too
Sorry.
depressing. No, it's okay. I got one real quick last thing, and this is a happy thing. So you've made a epic, entertaining movie for grown-ups that audiences around the world came out in droves to see, which is something to celebrate and feels like a bit of a miracle right now. And it's not a miracle. It's something that this movie shows. You do it well. It can happen. Can you give us? Can you give our poor beaten souls here a happy? Give us right now your perspective on movies and on just kind of where we're at right now, and make us.
I'm always an optimist when it comes to movies. I feel that this screen can be anything and can take us anywhere, and all of the fighting, the confrontation, the argument, the politics around what kind of seats are going to be in the theater, what kind of concessions are out there, what kind of, and then the business that we're all in, and all of the turmoil that we've had to go through this summer. These are necessary evolutions in the business that can be awful for people and very discomforting. Sorry, I'm trying to be happier.
We'll chop all this up when we write it. And we'll put the beginning, but my question, and we'll end with that.
Thank you. But ultimately, movies themselves, the storytelling, what it can be, never changes, and it's this absolute good. It's this wonderful thing that we all get to be a part of. That just, connects us all and continues to thrive. And it's just, for me, one of the most beautiful art forms that was ever created, and we get to live and work in the heart of where it's made and what it could be, and I think it's just one of the greatest privileges imaginable. I love the movies. We all love the movies, and we will continue to love the movies.
I'm not going to fuck that up. Christopher Nolan, ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.